Hello and welcome to IB Times TV. I'm Leanna Brinded, news editor for the International Business Times. Joining me now is Bob Smith. He's with Mytrah Energy. So hi, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, we're talking about renewable power, and it'll be great because the focus is on India, is how does wind energy contribute to the energy complex over there?
India has about 250 gigawatts of renewable power generation right now. It's about 5 times what the UK has. And in that 250 gigawatts, about 20 is wind today.
And in terms of that comparable growth to the UK market, why would you say that India is such at the forefront of that kind of renewable energy?
I think what's interesting about India, which is very different from the European context, is that power from renewable energy is competitive with the alternatives. So there's no subsidy in the Indian environment. So for India today, the country as a whole is short of power and it desperately needs additional capacity. So every piece of capacity that they add is being brought onto a new environment where there's no existing capacity. So it's a straightforward business conversation about renewables competing head on with the alternatives and being chosen as a better solution. What
can maybe Britain take away from that in terms of, while the incumbent market and dynamics are very different to obviously India, as we've just pointed out, are there any ways in terms of the market structure or in terms of regulation that the UK could look towards in terms of growing the wind energy market here?
The key difference between the UK and India is there is no government subsidy directly into the sector. And I think in the UK and in Europe as a whole, there's been a lot of government subsidy which has helped the sector to mature and develop. But at the same time, it's also holding back the development of the industry because people become comfortable with an environment where there is a subsidy. And that creates a distortion in the market. And so really in India today, we don't have that distortion. The market is much more efficient and renewables are competing head on with alternatives. In the UK, that could also happen, but the subsidy regime to some extent is stopping it from happening.
Would you say then it would be not impossible but too difficult, especially with the general election coming up and of course the politics surrounding green energy in the West, which is radically different to Asia, would make it too difficult to remove those subsidies now though?
I think it would be counterproductive to remove them today. I don't think it's a political conversation. I think it's just in this context, in the European context, renewable energy is replacing existing capacity. So to replace existing capacity, there has to be a reason to do that. And the incentive structure is what creates that reason to do it. In India, there isn't any existing capacity that is fulfilling the demand. And so it's a completely level playing field. You're creating new capacity from scratch. So I don't think that taking away subsidy is an option in the European context right now if we want to continue to replace existing generation with new renewable energy.
Looking forward with Mytrah Energy, obviously you guys are big in India. Are there any other markets outside that you're looking to possibly expand to or grow within over the next few years?
So Mytrah Energy, the company, is very India focused. We're very focused on the Indian, because we can see a huge growth opportunity in that environment. We're one of the biggest players in the sector right now. The industry is set to double in size over the next few years. And so we've got a tremendous opportunity to grow very quickly into that space. So that really requires all of our focus.
Okay.
What we do want to do though, is we want to access the international markets to bring capability and to bring finance into our Indian business. And so we can learn from what's gone on here. As the Indian renewable sector develops, we can learn from some of what's going on in Europe and we can use that. And also we can bring strategic partnerships and we can bring finance into India from the international market.
I know it's early days, but are there any, when you talk about those international markets that you want to tap for financing or strategic partnerships, are there any areas at the moment that you guys have your eyes on?
Yeah, so if you look at the recent developments in the market, we've seen a couple of companies issue bonds to the international market. And we've seen some companies developing the yieldco structure, which has been something that's been happening for quite a while now. Those have been applied, the yieldcos, primarily to European and US assets so far. I can definitely see that over time those things might be applied to Asian assets as well, in India in particular. The bond structures that are in place already, we've seen issued from India into the international markets. So certainly Europe and the US and the Asian market in general, all of those places are places which have the potential to add finance into the Indian sector.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
And that was Bob Smith from Mytrah Energy.